The cruise ship horn bellowed across the harbor, mocking me as I stood alone at the port, clutching my brand new floral suitcase. The screen of my phone glowed with my son Felix's message. Plans changed. I'm taking my new girlfriend instead. I read it 3 times, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves. They didn't. My chest tightened as if someone had wrapped a belt around it and pulled. 65 years old, dressed in my new blue dress and matching shoes I'd saved for months to buy, holding a ticket to nowhere. People rushed past me, families laughing, couples holding hands, all with somewhere to go, someone waiting. I lifted my phone with trembling hands and took a selfie, my unused passport visible in the frame, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Ma'am, are you boarding?" "Final call for the Caribbean Princess," a young attendant asked, clipboard in hand. "No," I said, straightening my back. "Not anymore." The taxi ride home felt eternal. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past, feeling hollow. This wasn't the first time Felix had disappointed me, but it was the most public, the most deliberate. My son, 40 years old, freshly divorced for the 3rd time, had dangled this trip in front of me for months. "Just the 2 of us, Mom," he'd said. "To reconnect, make up for lost time." I'd believed him. How could I have been so naive? My small apartment welcomed me back with its familiar silence. I left my suitcase by the door and sank into my armchair, not bothering to turn on the lights as evening descended. On the side table sat the framed photo of Felix as a child, gap-toothed and beaming, his little arms wrapped around my neck. I turned it face down. That night, I didn't cry. Crying would mean I was surprised. Instead, I made a cup of tea and sat on my balcony, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Something settled in me then. Not peace exactly, but resolve. The next morning, I called my friend Imogen. "He did what?" she gasped when I told her. "Oh, Nora, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I think I needed this. Needed to be stood up by your own son? Needed to finally see the truth," I replied, gazing at the suitcase I still hadn't unpacked. It's time I stopped waiting for Felix to become the son I've always wanted him to be. Over the next few weeks, I developed a routine. I walked in the park every morning. I joined a book club at the local library. I volunteered at the community garden on Wednesdays. Small things, but they were mine. Choices I made for myself, not centered around waiting for a phone call that rarely came. I was pruning roses in the garden when Imogen suggested I join her pottery class. "I have 2 left hands," I protested. "So did I when I started," she countered. "Come on, Nora. What have you got to lose?" The pottery studio was in an old converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and huge windows. The instructor, Sienna, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and clay-stained hands, greeted us warmly. "First time?" she asked, guiding me to a wheel. "First time for a lot of things lately," I admitted. She smiled knowingly. That's usually when the best things happen. My first attempts were disasters. Lopsided lumps that collapsed the moment I applied pressure. But there was something soothing about the cool clay spinning between my palms, the focus required to center it properly. For those 2 hours, I didn't think about Felix or cruises or broken promises. "Not bad for a beginner," Sienna said afterward, examining my wobbly bowl. "You have good instincts," I snorted. "My instincts haven't exactly served me well lately." Sienna wiped her hands on her apron. "Maybe you just haven't been listening to the right ones." I returned the next week and the week after. The 3rd week, Sienna asked if I'd like to help her prepare clay for the children's Saturday class. "I'd pay you, of course," she said. "I'm not looking for work," I replied automatically. "Aren't you?" She tilted her head. "Everyone's looking for something." I started working at the studio 2 mornings a week. The rhythm of it became a comfort. The quiet before students arrived, the methodical preparation of clay, the satisfaction of seeing empty shelves fill with materials ready for creating. Sienna and I often had lunch together afterward, sharing stories over sandwiches. "You never talk about your family," she observed one day. "Not much to say," I answered, focusing on my food. "Everyone has a story, Nora." I met her eyes, saw no judgment there. Mine isn't very interesting. Single mother, worked hard, raised a son who has his own life now. Sienna nodded, not pushing further. I was married for 20 years to a man who made me feel invisible. When he left, everyone expected me to fall apart. Instead, I opened this studio. She smiled. Sometimes the story we think we're living isn't the one we're meant to tell. Those words stayed with me as weeks turned into months. My apartment began to transform. Pottery pieces on shelves, colorful throws over the furniture, plants on the windowsill. I painted the living room yellow. I took down most of the old photos and replaced them with artwork from the local gallery. And then, 6 months after the cruise that never was, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. Felix stood there, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, looking older than his years. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I need help." I stood perfectly still in the doorway, feeling a familiar tug of maternal concern warring with my newer, harder resolve. "Please," he continued, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Everything's falling apart. I've lost my job. Millie left me. I'm being evicted." His eyes, so like mine, filled with tears. "You're the only one I can turn to." For a moment, I was back in the harbor, reading his message over and over, the cruise ship horn echoing in my ears. I felt the weight of decades of disappointment pressing on my shoulders. But I also felt something else now, the strength of the woman who had built a new life in the aftermath. "Mom?" Felix prompted, reaching for my hand. "You've always been there for me. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you now more than ever." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I took a step back, creating space between us. "Come in," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. Felix shuffled into my apartment, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the changes. "You redecorated." "I did a lot of things," I replied, closing the door. "Sit down. Would you like some tea?" He nodded, collapsing onto the couch where he'd spent countless afternoons as a teenager, playing video games while I worked double shifts to keep us afloat. I busied myself in the kitchen, grateful for the moment alone to collect my thoughts. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, Felix was holding one of my pottery pieces, a small, imperfect bowl glazed in deep blue. "You made this?" he asked. "Yes." I set the tea down. "Now tell me what's happening." The story poured out of him, how he'd spent too much money on the cruise with Millie, how she'd left him for someone with more ambition, how his drinking had worsened until he'd missed too many days at work. Classic Felix, always the victim, never responsible. "I just need a place to stay," he concluded. "Just until I get back on my feet. A few weeks tops." The old Nora would have said yes immediately, would have given him her bedroom and taken the couch, would have emptied her savings to help him start over. Again. But I wasn't that Nora anymore. "No," I said quietly. "What?" He blinked at me, confusion crossing his face. "You can't stay here, Felix." He set down the bowl with a thud. "Mom, I don't think you understand. I have nowhere else to go." "I understand perfectly," I said, surprised by my own calm. "And I'm sorry you're struggling. But I can't help you this time." His face darkened. "Can't or won't?" "Both." I took a sip of my tea. "What happened with the cruise money I sent you?" "That was $3,000. He avoided my gaze. "Things were tight. Millie wanted to go somewhere nice." "So you used the money I saved for our trip together to take your girlfriend on a luxury cruise," I stated flatly. "I was going to pay you back." His voice rose. "And it's not like you couldn't afford it. I know about your retirement fund. The fund I'd started when he was born. The fund I'd protected through every hardship, adding to it little by little for 40 years. He'd asked for it twice before, once for his second wedding, once to start a business that never materialized. "This isn't about money," I said. "It's about respect, about boundaries." "Boundaries?" He stood up, agitated. "I'm your son. I'm family. Yes, you are. And I love you." I set my mug down carefully. "But loving you doesn't mean I have to enable you. Not anymore." "So that's it? You're just going to throw me out on the street?" His voice cracked, tears welling in his eyes. the same technique that had worked on me countless times before. I stood up. I can help you find resources. There are programs for housing assistance, addiction counseling. I don't have a problem, he shouted, the familiar temper flaring. I just need my mother to act like a mother for once in her life. The words slammed into me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. For once in my life? I repeated, my voice barely audible. Felix, I have spent my entire adult life trying to be everything you needed. I worked 3 jobs when you were young so you could have the same opportunities as your friends. I helped you through school, bailed you out of jail after that DUI, paid for your first wedding, your second. I've answered every late-night call, loaned money I knew I'd never get back, made excuses for you to family and friends. I took a breath, steadying myself. And through all of it, I kept believing that someday you would grow up, that you would see me, really see me, as a person, not just a safety net. Felix's face twisted. That's not fair. I've had struggles you don't understand. We all have struggles, Felix. The difference is how we handle them. I moved toward the door. I think you should go now. You're seriously kicking me out? His voice rose in disbelief. I'm choosing not to rescue you this time, I corrected gently. There's a difference. His expression hardened. Fine. I don't need you anyway. I never did. He grabbed his jacket. Don't expect me to come running when you're old and alone and have no one to take care of you. The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. I sank down onto the couch, hands trembling, feeling both hollow and somehow lighter. I'd imagined this confrontation so many times, but the reality left me drained. The next day, I called in sick to the pottery studio. I couldn't face anyone, couldn't explain the storm of emotions within me. Guilt, grief, anger, relief. They churned together until I felt physically ill. Sienna texted around noon. Missing you today. Everything okay? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Family issues. I'll be fine. Her reply came immediately. My door's always open, not just the studio door. That evening, I found myself driving to Sienna's small house on the outskirts of town. She answered the door in paint-splattered overalls, reading glasses perched on top of her head. I brought wine, I said, holding up a bottle. I'll get the glasses, she responded with a smile. We sat on her back porch as the sun set, casting long shadows across her wild, artistic garden. I told her everything. About Felix, the cruise, his appearance at my door, our confrontation. The words tumbled out unchecked. Years of bottled pain finding release. When I finished, Sienna was quiet for a long moment. Do you think I did the right thing? I finally asked. She swirled the wine in her glass. I think you did the necessary thing. For both of you. It doesn't feel good. The necessary things rarely do at first. She reached over and squeezed my hand. But that doesn't make them wrong. That night, for the first time since Felix had left, I cried. Deep, heaving sobs that seemed to come from the very core of me. I cried for the little boy with the gap-toothed smile, for the troubled teenager he'd become, for the man who couldn't or wouldn't grow up. I cried for all my failures as a mother, real and imagined. And I cried for myself, for the woman who had lost herself so completely in motherhood that she'd forgotten how to exist beyond it. I stayed late at Sienna's, our conversation drifting to other topics as the night grew cooler. She told me about her journey after divorce, how she'd discovered her passion for art in her 40s, how she'd built the studio from nothing. I never thought I'd find myself at this age, she admitted. I always assumed life was something that happened to you, not something you created. I'm still learning that, I replied. When I finally headed home, something had shifted inside me. The guilt hadn't disappeared, but it had loosened its grip. I'd done the right thing, the necessary thing. Now I had to keep moving forward. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work at the studio. Sienna suggested I try teaching a beginner's class, and to my surprise, I loved it. There was something deeply satisfying about guiding others through their first tentative attempts, seeing their faces light up when they created something with their own hands. 2 months after Felix's visit, I received a letter with no return address. My heart raced as I recognized his handwriting. I sat down at my kitchen table before opening it, bracing myself for accusations or pleas. Instead, I found a single page. Mom, I'm at Riverside Recovery Center. It's a 90-day program. They say part of recovery is making amends, but I'm not ready for that yet. I'm still angry with you. But the counselor here says I should let you know where I am. Don't visit. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Felix. I read the letter 3 times, emotions warring within me. Pride that he was getting help. Hurt at his continued anger. Relief that he was safe. The maternal instinct to rush to his side battled with my newer understanding of boundaries. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Then I called Sienna. Are you still planning that gallery showing next month? I asked when she answered. Yes? Why? I think I'm ready to submit something, I said, glancing at the pottery wheel I'd recently installed in my spare room. If the offer's still open. It always was, she replied warmly. Come by tomorrow, we'll talk about it. That night I worked late in my makeshift home studio, losing myself in the rhythm of the wheel, the feel of the clay taking shape beneath my hands. As I worked, I thought about Felix, about mothers and sons, about letting go and holding on. The piece that emerged wasn't perfect. It had small irregularities, places where the walls were slightly thinner, where the glaze pooled unevenly. But it was honest. It was mine. As I cleaned up, my phone pinged with a text message. I wiped my hands and picked it up, expecting Sienna with details about the gallery. Instead, I saw a name that made my blood run cold. Christopher, my ex-husband, Felix's father. The message was brief. I heard about Felix. We need to talk. I'm in town next week. Christopher, the man who had walked out 35 years ago, who had never paid a dime of child support, who had reappeared occasionally only to disappear again, leaving fresh devastation in his wake. Christopher, who Felix had idolized despite his absence, or perhaps because of it. I stared at the message, a familiar dread rising within me. Just when I thought I was finding my footing, the ground was shifting beneath me once again. I didn't respond to Christopher's text that night, or the next morning. By afternoon, he'd texted again. Nora, please. Felix needs both his parents now. I nearly laughed out loud. Both parents? Where had his parental concern been for the past 3 decades? You're scowling at that phone like it personally offended you, Sienna remarked as we arranged pottery pieces in the studio's small gallery space. Ex-husband, I explained, sliding the phone back into my pocket. Felix's father. Suddenly he's concerned about being a parent. Sienna raised an eyebrow. The plot thickens. There's no plot. Just a man who thinks he can stroll back into our lives whenever it suits him. I carefully positioned a student's vase on a pedestal. I've been handling things without Christopher since Felix was 5 years old. We don't need him now. Maybe Felix does, Sienna said gently. I stopped, a ceramic bowl suspended in my hands. What do you mean? You told me Felix is in recovery. That's a vulnerable time. Having his father show up might be complicated, but it could also be healing. Or damaging, I countered, setting down the bowl with more force than necessary. Christopher has a way of making grand entrances and messy exits. Felix doesn't need that right now. Sienna studied me for a moment. And what about what you need? The question caught me off guard. This isn't about me, isn't it? She tilted her head. From what you've told me, you've spent your life making things about Felix. Maybe it's time to make some decisions based on what Nora needs. Her words stayed with me as I drove home, fighting the evening traffic. What did I need? For so long, my needs had been secondary to Felix's, to my jobs, to survival itself. The concept felt foreign, almost selfish. At home, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto my small balcony. The spring evening was mild, the sky fading to purple. Below, couples and families strolled along the sidewalk, heading to restaurants or the park. My phone pinged again. Christopher, I'm at the West Side Hotel, room 312. Please, Nora, for Felix, always for Felix. Never once for you or for us, or simply because it's the right thing to do. Before I could reconsider, I texted back, tomorrow, 1 p.m., Not at your hotel. The coffee shop on Main and 4th. His response came immediately. I'll be there. Thank you. I slept poorly that night, fragments of the past infiltrating my dreams. Christopher holding baby Felix, looking terrified and proud. Christopher missing Felix's 10th birthday because of a work emergency. Christopher's last visit when Felix was 15, promising to take him camping, then disappearing again without explanation. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, filled with the lunch crowd. I spotted Christopher immediately, sitting in a corner booth, looking older but still handsome in that effortless way that had first attracted me 40 years ago. His dark hair had gone silver at the temples. He still wore the same style of button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up precisely to the elbows. He stood when he saw me, his expression a careful neutral. Nora, thank you for coming. I nodded, sliding into the booth across from him. A waitress appeared, and I ordered black coffee, needing its bitterness, its clarity. You look good, Christopher said after she left. Really good. Let's skip the pleasantries, I replied. You said we needed to talk about Felix. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, the same gesture I'd seen from Felix 1,000 times. Always straight to the point. Some things never change. And some people never do, I countered. Why are you here, Christopher? You haven't been a father to Felix for 35 years. That's not fair. I've tried. Tried? The word came out sharper than I intended. Birthday cards some years? A phone call at Christmas if we were lucky? A visit every few years that inevitably ended with broken promises? That's not trying, Christopher. That's performing fatherhood without doing the work. The waitress returned with my coffee. I wrapped my hands around the mug, grateful for its warmth, for something to focus on besides the man across from me. I know I've made mistakes, he said after she left. Massive, unforgivable mistakes. But Felix called me Nora, from rehab. He's in trouble, and he reached out. Something cold settled in my stomach. He called you? Last week. He sounded lost. Said he'd finally hit bottom. Christopher leaned forward. He told me what happened between you two. About the cruise. About you turning him away. I didn't turn him away, I said, hearing the defensiveness in my voice. I refuse to enable him anymore. There's a difference. I know. Christopher's agreement surprised me. You did the right thing, Nora. It took courage. I stared at him, suspicious of the compliment. Why are you really here? He met my gaze directly. Because I owe him. And you. I've missed so much, hurt you both so deeply. He paused. And because I'm in recovery, too. 5 years sober next month. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. You're an alcoholic? Was. Am. Will always be. He shrugged slightly. I've been working the steps. Making amends where I can. Felix doesn't know yet. I sipped my coffee, trying to process this new information. Christopher, an alcoholic. It explained so much. His disappearances, broken promises, the erratic behavior. But it didn't excuse any of it. What exactly do you want from me? I asked finally. Your blessing, I suppose. Or at least not your opposition. He fidgeted with his napkin. I'd like to visit Felix at Riverside. To talk to him, father to son. To tell him my story, if he's willing to hear it. And then what? You'll disappear again when it gets hard? The bitterness I thought I'd moved past resurfaced, sharp and acrid. No. His voice was quiet but firm. Not this time. I've changed, Nora. The work I've done in recovery, it's real. Substantive. I won't pretend I can make up for the past, but I can be present for the future, whatever that looks like. I studied his face, searching for the lies I'd become so adept at spotting over the years. But instead of the charming deflection I expected, I saw something unfamiliar in Christopher's eyes. Humility. Felix may not want to see you, I warned. That's his choice. I'll respect it. And if he does, what then? Christopher spread his hands. Then I listen. I show up. I do what I can to support his recovery without enabling his old behaviors. You make it sound so simple. It's not. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. He smiled slightly. But necessary things rarely feel good at first. Sienna's words from my lips. I narrowed my eyes at him. Are you seeing someone at the studio? A woman named Sienna? He looked confused. No, why? Never mind. I I shook my head. Look, Christopher, I can't stop you from contacting Felix. He's an adult. But I won't make it easier for you either. Whatever relationship you build with him now, it has to be your work, not mine. That's fair, he agreed. More than fair, considering everything. We finished our coffees in an awkward silence. As I reached for my purse to leave, Christopher spoke again. There's one more thing. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. This is for you. Not for Felix, not for us. Just for you. I took the envelope cautiously. What is it? Open it when you're ready. Outside the coffee shop, I sat in my car for a long time, the unopened envelope on the passenger seat beside me. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to reject whatever gesture or explanation it contained. But another part, the part that had been learning to listen to my own needs, was curious. Back at home, I finally opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $75,000 and a short note. Nora, this doesn't begin to repay what I owe for all the years of child support, but it's a start. No strings attached. Use it for yourself, not for Felix. You deserve a life beyond motherhood. Christopher's eyes stared at the check, emotions swirling. Anger that he thought money could address decades of absence. Relief at the unexpected financial freedom it represented. Suspicion about his motives. And underneath it all, a quiet voice asking, "What would you do if you could do anything?" That night, I called Sienna. "Remember how you once said everyone has a story?" I asked when she answered. "I do. I think I'm ready to tell mine. Not just the parts about being Felix's mother. The whole story." "I'm listening," she said simply. And for the first time in decades, I let myself speak not as Felix's mother or Christopher's ex-wife, but as Nora, a woman with her own dreams, her own wounds, her own future still unfolding. The gallery opening was busier than I expected. Sienna had transformed the studio space with soft lighting and simple displays that made even the most amateur pieces look intentional, artistic. My collection, 5 pieces that told the story of my journey over the past year, occupied a small corner near the windows. Nervous? Sienna appeared beside me, elegant in a flowing blue dress I'd never seen before. Terrified, I admitted, smoothing down my new silk blouse, a small indulgence from Christopher's money. The check still sat in my dresser drawer, mostly untouched. I wasn't ready to make big decisions yet. Don't be. Your work speaks for itself. She handed me a glass of wine. And speaking of speaking for itself, there's someone here who'd like to meet you. She gestured toward a tall man examining my pottery with careful attention. He was perhaps in his late 60s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Who is he?" I whispered. "Alexander Gray. He owns the art gallery downtown and sometimes teaches at the community college. He's interested in your perspective." My stomach fluttered. My perspective? Your work tells a story, Nora. A powerful one. She nudged me forward gently. Go on. Talk to him. Alexander looked up as I approached, his expression brightening. You must be Nora. Sienna's told me about you. He extended his hand. These pieces are remarkable. Thank you, I managed, taking his hand briefly. Though I'm not sure remarkable is the right word. I'm still learning. Aren't we all? His smile was warm, genuine. What draws me to your work is the honesty in it. These aren't just vessels. They're expressions of transformation. I glanced at my collection. The first piece rough and asymmetrical. The later ones progressively more refined, but all bearing my distinct style. The blue-green glaze I'd developed myself. That's very perceptive of you, I said, surprised. I've been looking at art for 40 years. He gestured to the centerpiece, a bowl with visible mending in gold where I'd broken and repaired it. This piece particularly speaks to me. Kintsugi-inspired? Yes. I felt a flush of pleasure that he'd recognized the Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold to highlight the breaks rather than hide them. I believe our scars can be our most beautiful features if we honor them properly. We talked for nearly an hour, about art and technique, about teaching and learning. Alexander was easy to talk to, a good listener with thoughtful questions. When he eventually asked if I'd consider showing my work in his gallery's upcoming exhibition on emerging local artists, I surprised myself by saying yes, without hesitation. As the evening wound down, he handed me his card. "I've enjoyed our conversation, Nora. Perhaps we could continue it over dinner sometime?" I stared at the card, momentarily speechless. Was he asking me on a date? It had been so long since anyone had shown that kind of interest in me that I wasn't sure I recognized the signs anymore. "I'd like that," I finally said, tucking the card into my pocket. His smile deepened. "Wonderful. I'll call you next week." After he left, Sienna appeared at my elbow, eyebrows raised in question. "Don't start," I warned her, fighting a smile. I didn't say a word. She linked her arm through mine. "But if I did, I might say that Alexander is a lovely man who's been widowed for 5 years and hasn't shown interest in anyone until tonight." The possibility of romance at my age seemed absurd, yet exhilarating. But before I could explore that path, I had unfinished business to attend to. The next morning, I drove to Riverside Recovery Center. I hadn't told Felix I was coming. I hadn't spoken to him since he'd walked out of my apartment months ago. But after my conversation with Christopher, I felt a new urgency to see my son, to understand where he was in his own journey. Riverside was nothing like I'd imagined. No stark institutional walls or clinical sterility. Instead, it was set on sprawling grounds with gardens and walking paths. The buildings more like country lodges than a rehabilitation facility. At reception, I gave my name and asked to see Felix Mitchell. "Are you on his approved visitors list?" the young woman asked. "I'm his mother," I replied, realizing immediately how entitled that sounded. "But no, probably not. He doesn't know I'm coming." She looked sympathetic but shook her head. "I'm sorry, but our residents have to approve all visitors. It's part of their autonomy in recovery. Would you like to leave a message?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Please tell him Nora Mitchell came to see him. And that—" I paused, carefully choosing my words. "Tell him I respect his boundaries and will wait until he's ready." I left my phone number, though I knew he already had it, and walked out to the garden. I'd come all this way. I wanted a few minutes to collect myself before the drive home. I sat on a bench overlooking a small pond, watching koi fish swim lazily beneath lily pads. "Mom?" I turned to find Felix standing behind me, looking both familiar and strange. He'd lost weight, and his face seemed leaner, more defined. His eyes were clear in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Felix." I stood, unsure of the protocol. Should I hug him? Shake his hand? Keep my distance? He solved the dilemma by stepping forward and wrapping his arms around me in a quick, awkward embrace. "They said you were here. I should have called first," I apologized. "I know you said not to visit yet." "It's okay." He gestured to the bench, and we both sat. "I've actually been thinking about calling you. My counselor thinks it's time." A silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken words. When we both started to speak at once, the tension broke, and we shared a small laugh. "You first," I offered. Felix took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. For the cruise, for the way I spoke to you that day at your apartment, for a lifetime of taking you for granted." He met my eyes directly. "I'm sorry, Mom. Truly sorry." The words I'd waited so long to hear. Yet instead of triumph or vindication, I felt only a quiet sadness for all the wasted years. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." "I've been working the steps," he continued, "making a fearless moral inventory. It's not pretty." He gave a humorless laugh. "Turns out I've been angry my whole life. At Dad for leaving. At you for staying. At myself for not being enough to keep him around." "Oh, Felix." My heart ached. "Your father's choices were never about you. I know that now. Intellectually, at least." He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. But that little boy inside me still doesn't believe it. I thought of all the times I'd tried to compensate for Christopher's absence. All the ways I'd enabled Felix's behavior out of guilt and fear. I made mistakes too. I thought I could love you enough for 2 parents. But sometimes that love became something unhealthy for both of us. He nodded slowly. "My counselor calls it enmeshment. She says we need to establish healthier boundaries. Your father mentioned you called him, I said carefully, watching his reaction. Felix's expression tightened slightly. He told you that? We had coffee last week. He's in town. I know. He visited yesterday. Felix looked out over the pond. It was complicated. He told me he's in recovery, too. 5 years sober. How do you feel about that? He considered the question. Angry, at first. Where was this self-awareness when I was growing up? But then, he sighed. Then I realized I'm on the same journey. Who am I to judge his timeline? His maturity surprised me. This wasn't the Felix who had stormed out of my apartment, who had manipulated and blamed his way through life. He wants to rebuild our relationship, Felix continued. I'm not sure what that looks like yet, or if it's even possible. That's your decision to make, I said. No one else's. He turned to me, his expression earnest. What about us, Mom? Can we rebuild too? The question hung between us. I thought of all we'd been through, all the pain and disappointment, but also the love that had never wavered, even when it took unhealthy forms. I think we can, I said carefully, but it has to be different this time. Equal, respectful, with clear boundaries. I'd like that. His smile was tentative but genuine. My counselor suggested family therapy when I'm further along. Would you consider it? Yes, I agreed. I would. As we talked more, I shared bits of my new life. The pottery, the gallery showing, even Alexander, though I kept that brief, still unsure where it might lead. Felix listened with real interest, asking questions, seeming to see me as a person separate from motherhood perhaps for the first time. When it was time for me to leave, we walked together to the parking lot. Before getting into my car, I turned to him. There's something I want you to know, Felix. Something important. I took a deep breath. I'm proud of you for doing this hard work, but my life doesn't revolve around your recovery anymore. I'm building something for myself now. He nodded slowly. That's good, Mom. That's how it should be. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Felix stood watching, a solitary figure growing smaller with distance. But instead of the usual ache of separation, I felt something new, hope, tinged with freedom. My phone rang just as I merged onto the highway. Sienna's name flashed on the screen. How did it go? She asked when I answered. Better than expected, I replied. But that's not why you're calling, is it? No. Her voice bubbled with excitement. Remember that Arts Council grant I told you about? The one for community outreach programs? Vaguely. Well, they're looking for instructors to teach pottery to seniors at the community center. It's paid, Nora. And I recommended you. I nearly missed my exit. Me? I've barely been doing this a year. But you're a natural teacher. And you connect with people, especially those starting over later in life. She paused. They want to interview you next week. Say yes. The highway stretched before me, familiar yet somehow new. Teaching pottery, showing my work in a gallery, dinner with Alexander, family therapy with Felix. All these possibilities opening up at 65, an age when many believed life's meaningful chapters were ending rather than beginning. Nora? Are you still there? I smiled, feeling a surge of something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pure, unbridled anticipation for what came next. Yes, I said firmly. Tell them yes. You're sure about this? Sienna asked, helping me carry the last box to my car. It was dawn, the sky painted in soft pinks and golds, the street still quiet. I've never been more certain of anything, I replied, closing the trunk. It feels right. 6 months had passed since that day at Riverside. 6 months of profound change, of doors opening and closing, of finding my footing on this new path. Alexander and I had been seeing each other regularly. Dinners, art exhibitions, long walks where we talked about everything and nothing. He was kind, thoughtful, with a quiet humor that sneaked up on you. Our relationship was evolving slowly, intentionally. At our age, we both understood the value of patience, of savoring each moment rather than rushing toward some imagined future. My pottery classes at the senior center had become the highlight of my week. There was something deeply satisfying about guiding people my age and older as they discovered creativity they didn't know they possessed. Many came with stories of deferred dreams, of artistic impulses set aside for careers and families. I recognized myself in them. Felix had completed his 90 days at Riverside and moved into a halfway house. We spoke weekly, sometimes by phone, sometimes over coffee. Our conversations were different now, more honest, more equal. He was working as a counselor's assistant at an outpatient facility, considering going back to school for a degree in addiction studies. "You seem happy," he'd observed at our last meeting. "Lighter somehow." "I am," I'd told him. "I'm living for myself now. It makes a difference." He'd nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. I'm trying to do the same." His relationship with Christopher was progressing cautiously. They met for lunch every other week, slowly rebuilding trust, learning to relate as adults rather than through the fractured lens of the past. I kept my distance from those meetings, understanding that their healing journey was separate from mine. And now, another change was underway. The biggest one yet. "I still can't believe you're moving to the coast," Sienna said, leaning against my car. "What made you decide?" I smiled, thinking of the moment the idea had crystallized. I'd been sitting on Alexander's deck, watching the sunset over the ocean during a weekend visit to his beach house, when he'd casually mentioned a small cottage for rent nearby. "Have you ever thought of living by the sea?" he'd asked. The question had struck me like a revelation. Why hadn't I? What was keeping me in the city now that Felix was establishing his own life? Now that I was finally free to choose based solely on my own desires? It just felt like time, I told Sienna now. The city holds a lifetime of memories, but I'm ready for new ones. She pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm going to miss you terribly, you know." "It's only 2 hours away," I reminded her. "And you're always welcome. The cottage has a perfect space for a second pottery wheel." We'd already made plans for her to visit monthly. Alexander had offered his garage as a makeshift studio where I could continue creating, with space enough for teaching small classes if I wished. The gallery downtown had agreed to continue showing my work, even from a distance. With Christopher's money, which I'd finally made peace with accepting, I had enough saved for at least 2 years without financial worry. For the first time in my adult life, I was making choices unconstrained by immediate economic necessity. "Text me when you arrive," Sienna said, wiping away a tear. "And send pictures. I want to see this ocean view you keep raving about." "I promise." I climbed into the driver's seat, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and exhilaration. "Thank you, Sienna, for everything. Don't get sappy on me now." She smiled through her tears. "Just go make beautiful things by the sea." The drive to the coast took longer than usual with my car packed full. I stopped midway for coffee, sending Felix a quick text to let him know I was on schedule. He'd helped me pack the previous weekend, surprising me with his efficiency and organizational skills. He'd even fixed the wobbly leg on my favorite chair without being asked. "I'm trying to be useful these days," he'd explained when I thanked him, "instead of just taking up space." The cottage was exactly as I remembered from my previous visits. Small but bright, with weathered gray shingles and blue shutters. A stone path led from the gravel driveway to the front door, bordered by wild beach roses. The ocean was visible from every window, a constant soothing presence. Alexander met me there, helping unload the car and arrange the furniture. We worked in comfortable tandem, breaking only for sandwiches on the tiny back deck. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, noticing my momentary silence as I gazed out at the waves. "Not at all." I turned to him, feeling a rush of gratitude for this man who had entered my life so unexpectedly. Just thinking about how strange life is. A year ago, I was standing alone at a cruise port, feeling like my life was over. And now? "And now?" he prompted gently. "Now I feel like it's just beginning." After Alexander left, promising to return the next day to help with the rest of the unpacking, I walked down to the beach. The September evening was mild, the tourist crowds long gone, leaving the shore peaceful and nearly empty. I took off my shoes, letting the sand slide between my toes, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Felix. "All moved in? Everything okay?" I smiled, typing back, "All good. The ocean says hello." He responded immediately, "Tell it I'll visit soon. Love you, Mom." 3 simple words that meant more now because they came from a place of health rather than manipulation or habit. "Love you too," I wrote back. I walked along the water's edge, letting the waves lap at my ankles, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The pain and disappointment, yes, but also the unexpected gifts. Sienna's friendship, the discovery of pottery, Alexander's gentle courtship, and a new, healthier relationship with my son. As darkness fell, I made my way back to the cottage. Inside, I unpacked one last box, my pottery tools and the clay I'd brought from the city. Tomorrow, I would set up my wheel by the window that faced the sea. I would create new pieces inspired by this landscape, this chapter of my life. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the night sky scattered with stars, listening to the rhythm of the waves. For so long, I had defined myself primarily as Felix's mother, as Christopher's abandoned wife. Those identities would always be part of me, but they no longer contained me. I was Nora now. Artist, teacher, friend, lover, and yes, mother too. But on my own terms, with boundaries intact and possibilities unfurling before me like the endless horizon. I thought of that day at the port, the cruise ship departing without me, the selfie I'd taken with my unused passport. How devastated I'd felt, how humiliated. Now I understood that moment for what it truly was. Not an ending, but a beginning. The first step on a journey more meaningful than any cruise could have offered. I closed the cottage door and turned toward my new home, my new life. At 65, I had finally learned the most important lesson. Sometimes letting go is the only way to truly hold on, to yourself, to hope, to the future waiting beyond the pain. And that understanding, hard-won though it was, felt like the greatest freedom of all.